poison gas coming down, and they know that hundreds of people, if not more than 1,000, were killed in Damascus in August 2013. So the psychological impact of this use of chlorine bombs is quite significant on the local population. The lack of international attention is being paid to this because these are ongoing incidents. There are only a few casualties normally with each bomb used. Sometimes no fatalities, sometimes a few fatalities. So it doesn't get the attention in the same way as a large number of fatalities in one situation, such as Damascus in August 2013. And this trickle of use, where nobody can work out how to respond internationally, I have a great fear of is undermining this taboo against the use of chemical weapons. And there's a difficulty for the fact-finding mission. You know, I spoke earlier about the IMPA, isopropyl methylphosphonic acid, that is metabolized and stays relatively stable within the body when a human is exposed to sap. That is detectable. That provides really clear evidence of exposure to organophosphorus nerve agent. Chlorine exists, and many of the compounds that chlorine produces when it reacts with materials in the environment already exist in the environment. So if you take a soil sample, it's very, very hard to tell whether a chlorine has been used in that area. It's also quite difficult to detect within humans. You can tell things by when chlorine gas mixes with the fluids in the moisture in the lungs, it produces hydrochloric acid. Obviously, it does tremendous tissue damage, and that can be found post-mortem. Quite hard to tell in somebody who's been injured rather than killed. Certain people actually turn around at the beginning of the chlorine allegation saying, well, why can't we control this stuff? Well, the problem is, it's what is called the dual-use dilemma. There are peaceful uses for a lot of materials. Chlorine is not only a standard industrial chemical, it's used in very, very basic things such as water purification. Not necessarily chlorine gas, sodium hypochlorite, a number of other chlorine compounds from which you can generate chlorine again. So if you banned any attempt by anybody in Syria to possess chlorine, you would have millions of people drinking dirty water, which would cause a public health crisis. And this is the problem of the dual-use dilemma. So just to wrap up, in order to try and lead on to Q&A, what is it we've learned from some of this material about Syria and the Syrian experience? I'm going to jump in with something not raised yet, but it's just important in the long run, and that is we need the skill sets to get rid of Syrian chemical weapons when we realised there was weapons in the weapons stockpiles that the government was willing to get rid of. It was very difficult to regenerate some of those skills because some of those skills have been lost. And we need now to retain them now we've put them together. Because if another country, and there are countries outside of the Chemical Weapons Convention, only half a dozen, some of which, like South Sudan and Angola, we're not particularly worried about having chemical weapons programs, but North Korea, obviously of concern, that might have had a chemical weapons program, and Egypt, which used chemical weapons in 63 and 67, remains outside the convention. What is surprising is the destruction of the Syria program cost much less than people realised, and we need to retain those capabilities again to keep that cost down, so if there was another program to be destroyed. And we need to maintain the taboo. The taboo is the reason the Russian, as the key sponsor power to Syria, got involved, because it looked bad for them as well. Even though they denied that it was the government using them, they knew chemical weapons had to be capped. That even though it was their stated position that it couldn't have been the government, they were willing to do whatever was needed to get rid of chemical weapons from the country. If that taboo weakens, and remember at the time there was no legal prohibition on Syria having chemical weapons at the time of the 21st of August. If that taboo is weakened, that if there was a future use, you might not have got the response within Syria. So what does this mean for the future? Well, the problem with the solution to Syria is it's not going to be about the chemical weapons. It's got to be a wider political context in a solution. We can't solve the chemical weapons problem in isolation, much as I would love to. The Syrian internal conflict is too deeply entrenched, and we all know about the implications of Islamic State, issues of great power politics in the region. But if we look back at this in 10 years' time and say, well, we've had no accountability, either for justice for people or as providing some reason for people to think twice before they use it, I think we're all going to be very concerned. Because without that inhibitor on future use that comes from some form of accountability, again, it undermines the taboo. So we need to find new ways to try and maintain the taboo. And I normally hate presentations that people come up and say, such and such is really, really bad. And you sit sitting there in the audience thinking, okay, we know that's bad, what are we supposed to do about it? And the presenter doesn't actually give you an answer of what to do about it, or a step forward that can be taken. My problem is I can't see any great step forward. That's the great difficulty. I think that's what's inhibiting debate, because nobody can come up with a solution. So that's my last bullet point, is there's no simple recommendations for action. There is this horrible problem out there that over decades we have been incredibly successful at taking away the legitimacy of the use of chemical weapons and the use of biological weapons for that, which has been incredibly successful. And all of this may be being undermined by this slow process of chlorine use in Syria and the lack of interest from the rest of the world about it. So on that really depressing and negative comment, I shall finish. Thank you.